Last time, I added some particle effects, a vignette, and did some general polishing of how the game looked. This time, I set the game loose in my backyard. I posted the game in our Discord and in the Discord of the game engine that I use, and asked for some general feedback. Basically anything they noticed that was unintuitive or painful to do, and basically anything they thought about the game. And a lot of the feedback coming back was really useful. Things about how difficult it was, how certain parts felt, how they would do it differently, which is advice you should only half listen to because obviously it's your game, so you make it how you want to. But often, the things that they said that they would do instead, when they said them, I'd have that facepalm moment and be like, crap, why didn't I think of that? So the playtesting and feedback was going really well, but then somebody managed to break my game in every way possible. They were glitching through walls, through doors, getting into places they weren't supposed to be in, having enemies spawn outside of the room, just everything. And a lot of it turned out to be because the game checks to see if you're up against the wall, and if you are, it pushes you back into the room. But it does that every frame. So if you're dashing and firing your gun into the corner of the room, and you have a low frame rate, you can push yourself through the wall before it has a chance to check that you're there, which is how this player was doing it. And I'm not quite sure how I'm gonna fix that yet, but I'll figure something out. And then Vimlark, a fellow YouTube game dev, was kind enough to play the game live. And while a lot of their feedback was similar to what I'd gotten before, there were a lot of good moments.
Where did my clothes go?
And something that nobody brought up and I wouldn't have known about if it wasn't for seeing it played live was that he never got past danger level 5. And in my game, the higher the danger level gets, the more damage you take and a bigger variety of enemies show up. So I found out that most players weren't seeing the majority of all the cool enemies that I made in an earlier video. They were fighting ghosts, spiders, bees, slimes, and that's it. So the game definitely needed to be rebalanced on top of having this giant list of things fixed. Because that's one of the troubles of playtesting the game yourself. You overlook a lot of things because they've just always been that way. And I was really good at my game, so I was getting far enough to see those enemies, whereas the majority of players never saw them. So once they were all done with the playtesting, it was time for me to get to work. I had broken the list into critical, important, and would be nice to have, so that I knew what to work on first and I'd work my way down from there. So the first issue was just that enemies weren't shooting at the player, apparently. Most of the enemies were shooting just below the player. And I realized that's because when I added the drop shadows way back at the beginning, I changed their center point. But their center point was where the enemies were shooting at, so they started shooting at the bottom of the player instead of the player themselves. So thankfully that was a quick fix, but it felt a little silly that I hadn't noticed it. Next was actually an invincibility bug that, again, I didn't notice. A lot of players were able to get right on through the game without taking any damage because when you dash for the first time, it starts the dash timer. But the dash timer is one of the conditions for whether or not you get hit, because you can dash through enemy bullets. And so if you don't dash, the timer doesn't get created and you can't be hurt. So because I dash just constantly while playing the game, I never found that bug, but it was immediately obvious to anybody else. The next issue was that enemies that weren't walking towards you, but had other movement patterns, could just walk straight out the door. Because most of the basic enemies walked straight towards you, I'd never thought to make it so that they couldn't go through doors, because they just wouldn't. But as soon as enemies had behaviors other than walk towards you, so like the mother spider that would walk away, suddenly, enemies were just walking out on some players. And after making it so that the enemies were separated from doors, the next thing was that points that were on the ground would disappear over time, but when you got close to them and started pulling them in, they could still disappear during that time. So I changed it so that once you get within range of them, they switch animations to being picked up, and once that animation is switched, they'll be pulled towards you, and they won't be deleted anymore. Because it felt really silly to dash across the room, get to the points, and have them disappear just as you started picking them up. The next quick fix was the spider god enemy who spawned spiders. They weren't supposed to, but they were all dropping points when they died, which meant the players could just get to the first boss and continually farm points forever, which was obviously not good. Ironically though, people found this boss to be the hardest.
Yeah, I keep forgetting they spawn out of its fireballs.
And for that one, I just had to change one value. And then there was a common thought about my game, where people would say that it was way too hard and unforgiving, which was kind of the point, to some extent. But if you didn't take armor or health before the first boss, you would die in a single hit. And I agreed that that's a little bit too much. So I gave the player 1 extra health. So now on the first boss, if they don't take health or defense, they'll die in 2 hits instead of 1.
Did I just go from... I'm pretty sure I just went from like full health to 1. How did that happen? Okay, I won at least. Woo!
Which is literally 2 times as fair. And speaking of being unfair, people felt like they were getting hit and not knowing why they were hit. So for this, I added some screen shake, and I slowed down time for a couple of frames, so you had a second to realize you've been hit. And then there were a couple of tiny bugs, like animations getting stuck, your gun flying away when you paused, and characters being invisible when they're supposed to be visible in the overworld. But one of the most persistent issues was with enemies spawning too close to the doors. People would go into a door and have something right in their face and need to dash away immediately, which I thought was okay, but after watching Vimlark's playthrough, I got to see it happen live, and sometimes the enemies really could spawn way too close, and you really wouldn't have any time to get away.
I think we're good now. Yeah, like here, right? You really gotta kind of dash out of the way the moment you get into the room, and be very vigilant when you move into a room. Boss. Aww. Shenanigans. I call shenanigans on that one. What was I supposed to do?
So for that one, I changed the spawn range of the enemies and pulled it in a bit so it's a smaller rectangle that they can spawn in. But now, I need you to do me a favor. Could you comment down below with the name of a game with multiple characters where each character felt unique? Because I was playing Children of Morta, and I had favorite characters, which made me realize that in my game, picking between characters was kind of pointless. So to further distinguish between them, I want to give them some abilities and stat changes, balanced ones, that will make you want to pick one over the other, and hopefully have a favorite. And while I still have a lot to do on my list, I got through most of the critical and important stuff, so I want to work on adding some more variety to the game, to make each character, gun, and upgrade feel unique and interesting to pick. I'm planning on wrapping up the game so that I can hopefully release it on Newgrounds in a month. Thank you to everyone who playtested the game and gave me their feedback. And a big thank you to my patrons. Because of them, my coffee cup is full. And as always, the links to all the places that I hang out are down below, and if you click on one, then I'll see you there.